Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have been left without electricity or heating in sub-zero temperatures after Russia launched its latest attack on Ukraine's energy system. Kyiv says the overnight drone and missile strikes targeted electricity generation and distribution facilities across the country. The attacks come just days after what was touted as a promising round of peace talks between the warring parties. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is accelerating repairs to its damaged energy infrastructure.
The all-too-familiar damage from Russian strikes. Over 400 drones and around 40 missiles were launched on Ukraine overnight into Saturday, according to the Ukrainian president. Homes, businesses and infrastructure were hit. Energy facilities were targeted yet again. Some people chose to spend the night in one of Kyiv's subway stations.
The Russians are making us live in inhumane conditions, without heating, without electricity, and sleeping in the metro.
When the Europeans and the Americans grasp just a tiny bit of our reality, maybe just power cuts during freezing cold weather, maybe then they'll understand how we're surviving here. I don't want them to get bombed. No showerheads, nothing like that. Just this small example. Power cuts. Is gas and electricity not the most important thing for them? Maybe then they'd understand how they should talk to Russia during the peace talks.
And those US-brokered peace talks, the latest round of which ended on Friday in Abu Dhabi, have failed to produce a breakthrough between Ukraine and Russia. The Ukrainian president said both sides have been invited to a fresh round of talks in the US next week. Volodymyr Zelensky also said Washington has given both Kyiv and Moscow a deadline of June to end the war.
And from Munich, I'm now joined by security analyst Marina Miron. So very good to have you with us on the programme. So Poland says the air defence operation is now over. What is your assessment of what actually happened today?
Hello, Monica. Thank you for having me. Well, essentially what Poland is saying here, we remember what triggered the air defence operation, namely the crossing over of Russian Gerbera drones into Polish/NATO airspace and the subsequent response. And since that time, that was some 4 months ago, Poland has been on high alert for potential air threats. And what this essentially means is that the air traffic will operate as normal, and therefore all the measures that have been taken, that the radars and so on, will return to the normal operation. So in other words, Poland doesn't see any air threat coming from the Russian/Ukrainian side as a spillover of the Ukraine war.
Now, Ukraine and Russia, of course, ended 2 days of US-brokered talks in Abu Dhabi without a breakthrough. But President Zelensky says that Washington wants the war to end by June. How realistic do you think is that timeline?
Well, given the fact that there are so many discrepancies, and one of the main discrepancies is a territorial question, it could be a realistic timeline if other actors are involved in mitigating this, not just the United States, because we have to understand that the Russians will make concessions if certain concessions are made. And therefore, you will have to involve countries like China, big players who have a lot of leverage, in order to ensure that this happens. And of course, there has to be a discussion of what a peace would look like. So essentially, what the Trump administration said last year is that both sides will have to make concessions, and it should be painful to both sides. So both sides would be dissatisfied with the result. And this is how it might work. However, given the fact that Ukraine is in a precarious situation, waiting until June is it as a question, what is going to happen in the military domain? And from my perspective, it's not about the peace process per se when the Trump administration says, let's wait until June, or it has to be concluded by June, but rather, let's see who gains the upper hand on the battlefield. So we've heard it before from the Trump administration, let them fight it out on the battlefield. And this is a fear that I have that that is what is going to happen.
Well, security analyst Marina Miron there speaking to us from Munich. Marina, thank you so very much for that.
Thank you for having me.